I repaired the tap on the yacht at my wife's mother's birthday yacht party, and my wife's sister said, "Plumbers have no place here." Then I looked her in the eyes and said, "This is my yacht." You know how some moments stick with you forever? Like they're burned into your brain with a hot iron? Well, this was one of those moments, and let me tell you, it was about damn time. The whole thing was supposed to be a celebration, you know? Nothing fancy, just a good old-fashioned family get-together for my mother-in-law Marjorie's 70th birthday. And honestly, I was all for it. Marjorie's always been decent to me, unlike some other people in this family I could mention. When Camille suggested we throw the party on a yacht, I figured why the hell not? The woman deserved something special after 7 decades on this crazy planet. So there we were, cruising around the harbor on this gorgeous summer afternoon. The sun was beating down just right, not too hot, but warm enough to make you feel alive. Everyone was dressed to the nines. You know how these family gatherings go. The women were all dolled up in their sundresses and designer everything, while the guys were sporting those polo shirts that probably cost more than most people's rent. The champagne was flowing like water, and people were actually laughing and having a good time for once. But here's the thing about me. I notice stuff. Always have. Maybe it comes from years of working with my hands, fixing things that other people ignore until they break completely. So when I heard that steady drip, drip, drip coming from somewhere below deck, it was like nails on a chalkboard. I mean, everyone else was up top enjoying themselves, clinking glasses and telling stories about the good old days, but all I could focus on was that annoying sound. I tried to ignore it, I really did. I stood there on the upper deck, nursing my beer and nodding along while Uncle Frank told the same damn fishing story he's been telling for the past 5 years. But that drip kept calling to me, like some kind of twisted siren song. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "I'll be right back," I told Camille, who was deep in conversation with her college roommates about some reality TV show I'd never heard of. She barely looked up, just gave me one of those little waves that said, "Whatever, honey," without actually saying it. Down in the galley, I found the culprit, a fancy brass faucet that was weeping water like it had its heart broken. It wasn't anything major, mind you, just a loose connection that needed tightening. The kind of thing that would turn into a real problem if you left it alone, but totally fixable if you knew what you were doing. And after 20 years of keeping houses and apartments running smooth, I definitely knew what I was doing. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. There's something satisfying about fixing things, you know? Something pure about taking something that's broken and making it whole again. It's honest work, the kind that actually matters. While I was elbow deep in the repair, I could hear the party continuing above me. Laughter, music, the clink of glasses. It felt good knowing that everyone was having fun because I'd taken care of the little stuff. That's when she showed up. Jaleesa, Camille's younger sister and the family's self-appointed queen bee. She appeared in the galley doorway like some kind of designer-clad apparition, champagne flute in one perfectly manicured hand, those ridiculous diamond-studded sunglasses perched on her nose even though we were inside. She took a sip of her bubbly, looked me up and down like I was something she'd scrape off her shoe, and delivered that line that would change everything. "Plumbers have no place here." The way she said it, not angry, not even particularly mean, just matter of fact, like she was stating an obvious truth. Like I was some kind of hired help who'd wandered into the wrong party. Like I didn't belong on the same boat as her precious family. I felt something shift inside me in that moment. Not anger, exactly. More like clarity. Like suddenly everything made perfect sense. I took my time wiping my hands on the towel, making sure to get every drop of water off my fingers. Then I stood up slowly, meeting her gaze straight on. Behind those fancy sunglasses, I could see her eyes, cold, dismissive, already looking past me like I wasn't worth her attention. "This is my yacht." For words. That's all it took. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers, hitting the galley floor with a satisfying crash. Bubbles and glass scattered everywhere, but neither of us moved to clean it up. We just stood there, staring at each other across that fancy galley, while the truth settled in like dust after an explosion. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, like a fish gasping for air. For once in her entitled life, Jaleesa was speechless. The woman who always had a cutting remark ready, who could slice you down to size with nothing but a raised eyebrow and a well-timed sigh, couldn't find a single word to say. Above us, the party continued. People were still laughing, still celebrating, still living in the world where I was just Camille's handy husband who fixed things and stayed out of the way. But down here in this galley, surrounded by broken glass and spilled champagne, everything had changed. I stepped around the mess and headed for the stairs, leaving Jaleesa standing there in her designer dress and her shock. As I climbed back up to join the party, I could hear her finally starting to move, probably looking for something to clean up the champagne with. But I wasn't looking back anymore. The party was just getting started. Let me take you back 2 months before that party, back when everything was still normal and nobody had a clue what was really going on. It was a Tuesday morning in May, and I was sitting in the offices of Premium Marine Sales, staring at a check that represented 15 years of my life. 15 years of getting up at 5:30 every morning, of fixing leaky pipes and broken electrical panels while everyone else was still hitting the snooze button. 15 years of side jobs and weekend projects, of saying no thanks when the guys wanted to grab beers after work because I had another gig lined up. 15 years of living below my means while everyone around me thought I was just barely scraping by. The sales guy, some kid named Brad who probably made more in commission than I did in a year, kept looking at me like I was pulling some kind of scam. I mean, I get it. Here I am, walking into this fancy marina office in my work boots and faded jeans, asking to buy a $2.6 million yacht with cash. Not financing, not some complicated lease arrangement, straight up cash money. You sure about this, Mr. Sullivan? Brad asked for the 3rd time, tapping his fancy pen against the contract. I mean, we can always arrange financing if you need more time to. I'm sure. I cut him off, sliding the cashier's check across his glass desk. The Alabaster. As is. Full price. The boat had been sitting on their lot for 8 months. Some tech billionaire had ordered it custom, then got cold feet when his company went belly up. Their loss was about to become my gain. She was a beauty too, 68 feet of pure elegance, with 3 bedrooms, a full galley, and enough deck space to host a decent-sized party. The kind of boat that screamed money, even when it was just sitting still. Brad finally stopped fidgeting and started the paperwork. While he was printing out forms and making copies, I let my mind wander back to how this whole thing started. It wasn't some grand master plan, you know? It started small, the way most real things do. Back when Camille was in medical school, money was tighter than a tick on a dog. I was working my regular maintenance job at the apartment complex, but it wasn't enough to cover her tuition, our rent, and everything else. So I started picking up side work, fixing sinks for neighbors, rewiring old houses, installing ceiling fans for anyone who'd pay me. At first, it was just about survival. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was actually good at this stuff. Really good. Word got around. And pretty soon I had more work than I could handle. While Camille was buried in textbooks, I was building a reputation as the guy who could fix anything. The money started adding up. Not fast, but steady. Like compound interest, but with calloused hands and a sore back. I opened a separate savings account that Camille didn't know about, not because I was hiding anything shady, but because I wanted to surprise her someday. Maybe buy us a little house with a yard, or take her on that trip to Europe she was always talking about. But then the comments started. It was little things at first. Camille's friends making jokes about me being handy around the house. Her mother asking if I'd ever consider a real career. Her sister Jaleesa with her constant digs about blue-collar work and how some people are meant to serve. The worst part? Camille never defended me. Not once. I remember this one dinner party at her parents' house, maybe 3 years ago. I just finished installing a new garbage disposal for them. Saved them about $400 in plumber fees, and I came upstairs to join everyone for dessert. Jaleesa took one look at my hands, wrinkled her nose, and said, maybe Owen should eat in the kitchen with the help. Everyone laughed. Everyone, including my wife. That night, lying in bed next to Camille, I made a decision. I wasn't going to get mad. I wasn't going to start fights or demand respect. I was going to do something better. I was going to prove them all wrong in a way they'd never see coming. So I doubled down. Every weekend, every evening, every spare moment I had went into building my business. I registered as an LLC, got proper insurance, started charging what I was actually worth instead of the friend and family discount I'd been giving everyone. I invested every penny I could spare, watching those numbers grow month by month. The beautiful thing about having a family that thinks you're just getting by, they never ask uncomfortable questions about money. When I started working longer hours, they figured I was just trying to make ends meet. When I bought better tools, they assumed I was barely staying afloat. When I turned down invitations to expensive dinners or weekend trips, they thought I couldn't afford them. They never considered that I was choosing not to spend money because I had bigger plans. By last year, I had enough saved to put a down payment on a decent house. By Christmas, I could have bought 2 houses. By March, I was looking at boats. Not because I needed a boat, you understand. Because I wanted to make a statement. All set, Mr. Sullivan, Brad said, sliding the final papers across the desk. She's all yours. Keys, registration, insurance. Everything's in order. Welcome to the premium marine family. I signed my name with a cheap Bic pen, the same kind I'd been using to write up work orders for 15 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Walking out to the dock, I got my first real look at the Alabaster as her owner. She was even more beautiful than I'd remembered, gleaming white against the blue water, her brass fittings catching the afternoon sun. This wasn't just a boat, this was proof. Proof that the guy they'd been calling the help had been playing a completely different game all along. I didn't tell Camille that night, or the next week, or the next month. I was saving the reveal for exactly the right moment. If you've never met someone who thinks the world revolves around them, let me introduce you to Jaleesa Marie Patterson. Emphasis on the Marie, because she insists everyone use her full name like she's some kind of European royalty or something. At 28, she'd already mastered the art of making every single gathering about her, and Marjorie's birthday party was no exception. The woman had this way of walking that I swear she practiced in front of a mirror. Not just walking, strutting, like she was on some invisible runway, and the rest of us were just background props in her personal fashion show. Today she was wearing this flowing white sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, paired with those ridiculous diamond-studded sunglasses that she wore everywhere, rain or shine, indoors or out. God forbid anyone should miss the fact that she could afford to put diamonds on her face. Oh my God, you guys, this yacht is absolutely divine, she announced to nobody in particular as she made her grand entrance onto the upper deck. Her voice had this way of carrying, you know? Like she'd taken voice projection classes specifically to make sure everyone within a 50-foot radius could hear her every thought. She air-kissed her way around the party, making sure to compliment everyone's outfits while simultaneously letting them know hers was better. Sarah, that dress is so cute. Where'd you get it, Target? And somehow, she made it sound like a genuine compliment instead of the backhanded insult it actually was. But here's the thing about Jaleesa. She wasn't content to just be the center of attention. She needed to establish a hierarchy, and that meant putting people in their place. Especially people like me. I was maybe 20 minutes into trying to enjoy the party when the first shot came. A couple of kids, Camille's cousin's twins, had gotten a little too enthusiastic with their sodas and managed to spill sticky orange liquid all over the deck chairs. No big deal, right? Accidents happen. Kids will be kids, that sort of thing. I grabbed some towels from the galley and started cleaning up the mess, partly because it needed doing and partly because I didn't want the stuff to stain the deck furniture. The kid's mom was mortified, apologizing left and right, but I just waved her off. Don't worry about it. Happens all the time. That's when Jaleesa decided to chime in. Who invited the maintenance guy? She said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. She was lounging in one of the non-sticky chairs, champagne flute in hand, looking at me through those damn sunglasses like I was some kind of zoo exhibit. A few people chuckled. Not mean-spirited laughs, just nervous little sounds that people make when they don't know how to react. But Camille, my own wife, the woman I'd been supporting through medical school, the person who was supposed to have my back, she actually laughed. Not a nervous giggle, but a real laugh, like Jaleesa had just told the funniest joke she'd ever heard. I kept cleaning. Didn't say a word, didn't even look up. Just kept wiping down those chairs like it was the most important job in the world. But inside, I was taking notes. Mental notes about who laughed, who looked uncomfortable, and who my wife really was when she thought it mattered. The second incident came during lunch. I'd picked out the wine myself, a nice Pinot Grigio that I thought would go well with the seafood spread we'd ordered. Nothing too fancy, but definitely not cheap either. I was going around the table, topping off glasses and making sure everyone had what they needed, when Jaleesa held up her glass and examined it like she was some kind of sommelier. Interesting choice, she said, swirling the wine around and taking a delicate sip. Very budget-conscious. I suppose not everyone can afford the good stuff. She said it with this little smile, like she was sharing an inside joke with everyone at the table. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but nobody called her out. Nobody told her she was being rude. They just sat there and let her turn my attempt at hospitality into another opportunity to remind everyone that I wasn't quite up to their standards. You know what I did? I smiled right back at her and refilled her glass. Glad you're enjoying it, I said, my voice perfectly calm and friendly. There's plenty more where that came from. The thing is, I wasn't even angry anymore. Not really. Somewhere between the maintenance guy comment and the wine criticism, something had shifted in my head. It was like watching a performance that I'd seen too many times before. Jaleesa needed to be the star of every show, needed to have someone to look down on, needed to establish her place at the top of whatever social ladder she thought we were all climbing. And I was done being her stepping stone. I'd spent years watching this woman parade around like she owned every room she walked into. Years of listening to her subtle digs and not-so-subtle put-downs. Years of watching my wife laugh along with jokes at my expense. Of seeing my mother-in-law nod approvingly when Jaleesa made comments about people knowing their place. But here's what none of them knew. I'd been planning my own performance. And unlike Jaleesa's daily drama queen routine, mine was going to have a real finale. As the afternoon wore on, I played my part perfectly. The helpful husband, the handy guy who fixed things and stayed in the background. When people needed drinks, I got them drinks. When someone wanted to know how the Yacht sound system worked, I showed them the controls. When Marjorie commented on how lovely everything looked, I smiled and said it was my pleasure. All the while, Jaleesa held court at the center of every conversation, her laughter ringing out across the water like some kind of siren call. She told stories about her latest shopping trips, her yoga instructor, her plans for a girls' weekend in the Hamptons. She complained about her job at the marketing firm, about how nobody there really understood creative vision the way she did. And every so often, she'd throw in another little comment about me. About how nice it was that some people enjoyed simple work. About how important it was to appreciate the help. About how lucky Camille was to have someone so dedicated to service. Each comment was carefully calculated, designed to keep me in my place without being so obvious that someone might call her out on it. She was good at it, I'll give her that. Years of practice had made her an expert at the subtle art of putting people down while maintaining plausible deniability. But I wasn't taking the bait. Not yet. I just kept smiling, kept serving, kept playing the role they all expected me to play. Because I knew something they didn't know. I knew that the best performances always save the biggest surprises for the end. And my big surprise was going to be worth the wait. The afternoon was hitting that sweet spot where everyone had just enough champagne in them to get loud and loose, but not so much that they were falling overboard or saying things they'd really regret later. The music was pumping from the sound system I'd spent 20 minutes earlier explaining to Uncle Frank, and most of the party had migrated to the upper deck, where the sun was perfect and the ocean breeze kept things comfortable. I was up there too, leaning against the railing with a beer in my hand, half listening to Marjorie tell some story about her college days when she apparently used to sneak out of her dorm to go dancing at some jazz club downtown. It was actually a pretty good story. The woman had more fire in her back in the day than I'd given her credit for, but I kept getting distracted by this nagging feeling that something wasn't right. You know that feeling? When your brain picks up on something, but can't quite put its finger on what's wrong. It's like when you walk into your house and immediately know someone's been there, even though nothing looks obviously out of place. That's what was happening to me right now. Then I heard it. That same damn dripping sound from earlier, except now it was different. Faster. More urgent. Like instead of a gentle weep, the faucet was straight up crying. "Excuse me for a minute," I said to Marjorie, who was just getting to the good part of her story where she and her roommate had to climb back up the fire escape at 3 a.m. "Oh, don't worry about me, dear," she said, patting my arm. "You go take care of whatever needs taking care of." If she only knew. I made my way down to the galley, expecting to find maybe a loose connection that had worked itself free, or perhaps some water pressure issue from everyone using the facilities at the same time. But what I found was a whole lot worse than that. The fancy brass faucet that I'd carefully repaired just an hour ago was now twisted completely out of alignment, spraying water everywhere like some kind of demented garden sprinkler. The beautiful teak countertop was soaked, water was pooling on the floor, and if I didn't shut it off soon, We were going to have a real mess on our hands. But here's the thing. Faucets don't just randomly twist themselves out of position. This wasn't wear and tear, and it wasn't some manufacturing defect. Someone had deliberately forced this thing until it broke, and they'd done it recently, because the water damage was still fresh. I grabbed the shut-off valve under the sink and turned off the water supply, then started mopping up the mess with every towel I could find. While I was working, my mind was racing through the possibilities. Who would do something like this? And more importantly, why? It didn't take me long to narrow down the suspect list. Most of the guests were family members who had no reason to mess with the boat's plumbing, and the few friends who'd come along were decent people who wouldn't dream of sabotaging someone else's property. That left maybe 3 or 4 people who had both the opportunity and the motivation to pull something like this. At the top of that list was Chase Whitmore, Julisa's boyfriend, and possibly the most entitled piece of work I'd ever had the displeasure of meeting. The guy was everything I'd learned to hate about people who'd never worked a real day in their lives. 26 years old, trust fund baby, and absolutely convinced that anyone who worked with their hands was somehow beneath him. I'd had run-ins with Chase before at family gatherings. Nothing major, just those little moments where he'd make comments about blue-collar work, or suggest that maybe I should aspire to something more meaningful. The kind of passive-aggressive bullshit that guys like him specialized in, designed to make you feel small without giving you anything concrete to call them out on. Just last Christmas, at Camille's parents' house, I'd overheard him talking to some friend of his about how sad it was that some people peaked in high school and never figured out how to move beyond manual labor. When I'd walked into the room, he'd gotten all fake friendly, slapping me on the back and asking how the handyman business was going. But this wasn't just talk anymore. This was action. This was someone taking the time and effort to actually damage my property, probably thinking it was some kind of joke. Like breaking my stuff was funny because, hey, I'm just a working guy who can fix it anyway, right? I finished cleaning up the water and took a closer look at the faucet itself. The brass was scratched and scored in a way that suggested someone had used pliers or maybe a wrench to force it out of position. They'd twisted it hard enough to strip some of the threads and bend the mounting hardware. This wasn't accidental damage. This was deliberate destruction. From up on deck, I could hear Chase's voice carrying over the music and conversation. He was holding court near the bow, probably telling everyone about his latest trip to Martha's Vineyard or his new job at his daddy's investment firm. Every now and then, his laugh would rise above the noise, this braying, self-satisfied sound that made my teeth itch. I could have marched up there right then and confronted him. Could have called him out in front of everyone and demanded an explanation. But that would have been the old me, the guy who reacted instead of planned, who let his emotions drive the bus instead of his brain. Instead, I did something smarter. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of the damage. Close-ups of the scratched brass, wide shots of the water damage, detailed photos of the stripped threads and bent mounting hardware. Evidence, in case I needed it later. Then I got to work fixing the mess. Again, it took me another 20 minutes to get everything back in working order. And by the time I was done, my shirt was soaked with sweat and my hands were cramped from working in the tight space under the sink. But here's the beautiful thing about being prepared. I wasn't just documenting the damage with my phone. See, when I'd bought the Alabaster, one of the first things I'd done was install a comprehensive security system. Nothing too obvious. I wasn't trying to turn my yacht into Fort Knox, but enough to keep an eye on things when I wasn't around. 8 discrete cameras, to be exact. High definition, motion activated, with enough storage capacity to record weeks of footage. Most of them were focused on the exterior spaces where theft was more likely, but I put one in the galley too, hidden behind the spice rack, where nobody would think to look for it. If Chase had done what I thought he'd done, I was going to have it all on video. Crystal clear, undeniable proof of exactly who had vandalized my property and when they'd done it. I finished up the repair work and washed my hands in the now properly functioning sink. Above me, the party continued, completely oblivious to what had just happened below deck. Someone had cranked up the music, and I could hear people laughing and singing along to some old Madonna song. Let them enjoy themselves, I thought. Let Chase think he'd gotten away with his little prank. Let everyone assume that good old Owen had just fixed another random problem and moved on with his life. Because in a few hours, when I had a chance to review that security footage, I was going to know exactly what had happened down here. And then we'd see who was laughing. By the time I made it back up to the main deck, the party had shifted into that golden hour mode where everything looks like a postcard and everyone's having the time of their lives. The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, painting the whole scene in warm amber light, and someone had broken out the good scotch that I'd been saving for later. The music had mellowed out from the upbeat stuff to something more chill, and people were settling into those deep conversations that happen when alcohol and good vibes collide. Camille was over by the stern with her college friends, all of them laughing at something on someone's phone. Marjorie had claimed the best seat in the house, a cushioned lounge chair where she could survey her kingdom and accept birthday wishes from her subjects. And Chase? He was right where I'd expected to find him, standing near the bow with a rocks glass in his hand, gesturing wildly as he told some story that probably starred himself as the hero. I grabbed a fresh beer from the cooler and played the part, smiled when people talked to me, nodded along with conversations, even managed to laugh at Uncle Frank's terrible joke about a priest, a rabbi, and a bartender. But the whole time, part of my brain was focused on one thing: getting down to that navigation cabin and checking the security footage. The navigation cabin was my favorite spot on the whole yacht, a compact but sophisticated space tucked away behind the main salon, filled with all the electronic equipment that kept the Alabaster running smooth. GPS systems, radar displays, communication equipment, and most importantly for today's purposes, the central hub for my security system. I'd spent a fortune on that system, probably more than most people spend on a car. But it wasn't just about protecting the boat from thieves, though that was part of it. It was about having eyes and ears everywhere, about knowing exactly what happened on my property and when it happened. Call it paranoia if you want, but I called it being prepared. Hey Owen. Jaleesa's voice cut through my thoughts like a buzzsaw. She was heading my way with that predatory smile of hers, champagne flute in hand and mischief in her eyes. Where are you sneaking off to now? Don't tell me something else is broken. Just checking the instruments, I said, keeping my voice casual, making sure we're on course. She laughed like I'd just told her the funniest joke in the world. Oh honey, we're anchored. We're not going anywhere. She took a sip of her champagne and looked me up and down. You know, most people would just hire a real captain for something like this. Someone who actually knows what they're doing. I'll keep that in mind, I said, and slipped away before she could fire off another round. The navigation cabin was blissfully quiet after the chaos up top. I locked the door behind me, didn't need any unexpected visitors while I was conducting my investigation, and settled into the captain's chair in front of the main console. The security system's interface was elegant in its simplicity, just a touchscreen monitor and a handful of controls that let me access any camera from any time period. I pulled up the galley camera first, scrolling back through the timeline until I found the relevant time period. The system showed everything in crisp, high-definition color, with timestamps accurate to the second. I fast-forwarded through the boring stuff, me fixing the original leak, various guests wandering through to grab drinks or use the head, until I found what I was looking for. 3:47 p.m. Chase Whitmore enters the galley. There he was, larger than life on my monitor, looking around to make sure nobody was watching before approaching the sink area. Even on camera, you could see the arrogance in the way he moved, like he owned the place and everyone in it was just there for his entertainment. He spent maybe 30 seconds examining the faucet I'd just repaired, running his fingers over the brass fittings like he was some kind of expert. Then he disappeared from the camera's view for a moment, and when he came back, he was carrying something in his hand. Pliers. The bastard had brought his own tools. What happened next was like watching a masterclass in deliberate destruction. Chase positioned the pliers on the faucet's mounting hardware and started twisting, slowly at first, then with increasing force as the metal began to give way. You could see the concentration on his face, the way he bit his lower lip as he worked to damage my property as thoroughly as possible. When the faucet finally gave way and water started spraying everywhere, Chase actually smiled. Not a little grin or a satisfied smirk, a full-on, ear-to-ear smile like he'd just accomplished something genuinely impressive. He stood there for maybe 10 seconds, admiring his handiwork as water soaked the countertop and started pooling on the floor. Then came the part that really got to me. Chase pulled out a dish towel and carefully wiped down the pliers, removing any fingerprints or evidence that he'd been there. He even took the time to wipe down the faucet itself, making sure there was no trace of his involvement in the sabotage. The whole thing took less than 3 minutes from start to finish. 3 minutes to deliberately destroy something that belonged to me, then cover his tracks like some kind of criminal mastermind. And when he was done, he just strolled out of the galley like nothing had happened, probably heading back up to rejoin the party and continue playing the role of the charming boyfriend. I watched the footage 3 more times, just to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Each viewing made me angrier, but also more focused. This wasn't just vandalism. This was a calculated insult, designed to put me in my place and remind me that people like Chase could mess with people like me whenever they felt like it. But here's what Chase didn't know. I'd been recording everything. Every second of his little performance was saved in crystal-clear digital perfection, complete with timestamps and metadata that would hold up in any court of law. I plugged a USB drive into the system and copied the relevant footage, along with a few minutes of context before and after the incident. The file transferred quickly, and I slipped the drive into my pocket like a loaded gun. This was better than I'd hoped for. Not only did I have proof of what Chase had done, but I had it in a format that would be impossible to deny or explain away. No, he said. She said, bullshit. No room for interpretation or excuses. Just cold, hard evidence of deliberate sabotage. I locked the navigation cabin behind me and headed back to the party, where Chase was still holding court near the bow, his voice carrying over the music as he regaled everyone with tales of his latest business triumph. He looked so pleased with himself, so confident that he'd gotten away with his little prank. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But as I watched him laugh and gesture with that rocks glass in his hand, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to change, I realized something important. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even particularly upset. I was just ready to take control of the narrative for once in my life. Dinner was one of those perfect moments that you see in movies, the kind where everything seems too good to be true, because it usually is. We'd set up the main table on the aft deck, with real china and cloth napkins and everything. The catering company had outdone themselves with a spread that looked like something out of a magazine. Grilled salmon, lobster tails, some kind of fancy pasta salad that probably had a French name I couldn't pronounce. The sun was hanging low on the horizon, painting everything in that golden light that makes even the most ordinary moments feel magical. Marjorie was in her element, holding court at the head of the table in a flowing blue dress that matched her eyes, accepting compliments and birthday wishes like the queen she deserved to be on her special day. Everyone was loose and happy from the afternoon's drinking, but not sloppy drunk. Just that perfect level where conversations flow easy and everyone's funnier than they usually are. Chase had been regaling the table with stories about his latest business deals, waving his fork around like a conductor's baton as he described some complicated merger that was going to make him stupid rich. Julissa hung on his every word, occasionally throwing in comments about how brilliant he was and how lucky his company was to have such vision. I sat there quietly, cutting my salmon into precise little pieces and nodding along when people talked to me, playing the part of the supportive husband, the helpful guy who was just grateful to be included in such distinguished company. But the whole time, that USB drive was burning a hole in my pocket like a loaded gun. The conversation had moved on to vacation plans. Someone was talking about a ski trip to Aspen, while someone else was planning a wine tour through Tuscany, when I decided it was time. The moment felt right, you know? Everyone was relaxed, guards were down, and we had a captive audience with nowhere to run. I stood up slowly, tapping my knife against my wine glass to get everyone's attention. The sound cut through the chatter like a bell, and gradually all eyes turned toward me. Conversations died out one by one until the only sounds were the gentle lapping of waves against the hull and the distant cry of seagulls. Before we get to dessert, I said, keeping my voice calm and friendly, I'd like to show you all something. Camille looked up at me with curious eyes, probably expecting some kind of heartfelt toast to her mother. Marjorie smiled that indulgent smile that said she was ready for whatever sweet sentiment I was about to share. Even Julissa looked mildly interested, though I could see her already composing whatever cutting comment she'd make after I finished. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and walked over to the entertainment console that was built into the deck railing. The yacht came equipped with a massive LED television that could be seen from anywhere on the aft deck. Perfect for watching movies under the stars, or in this case, for conducting a little public education. This is security footage from earlier today, I said as I plugged in the drive and started navigating to the right file. Timestamp shows 3:45 p.m. A few people exchanged glances, but nobody said anything. I could feel the energy at the table shifting from relaxed curiosity to something more tense, though nobody quite knew why yet. The footage started playing on the big screen, crystal clear and in living color. At first it just showed an empty galley, peaceful and quiet. Then Chase appeared in the frame, looking around nervously before approaching the sink area. "What the hell is this?" Chase said, his voice cracking slightly. He'd gone pale, which made his expensive tan look fake and orange. "Just keep watching," I said. "It gets better." On screen, Chase was examining the faucet, then disappearing briefly before returning with the pliers. You could see everything in perfect detail. The deliberate way he positioned the tools, the concentration on his face as he worked to damage the fixtures, the satisfied smile when water started spraying everywhere. The table had gone completely silent. Nobody was eating anymore, nobody was drinking. Everyone was staring at the screen with varying degrees of shock, confusion, and in Chase's case, pure panic. "You vandalized my yacht," I said, my voice still calm and conversational, like I was commenting on the weather or asking someone to pass the salt. Chase started stuttering, his face cycling through about 6 different shades of red. That's not. This is some kind of setup." 3:45 p.m., I continued, pointing at the timestamp in the corner of the screen. Chase enters the galley. 3:46 p.m., he begins deliberately damaging the faucet with pliers that he brought specifically for this purpose. 3:47 p.m., he cleans up the evidence and leaves. Jaleesa was staring at her boyfriend like she'd never seen him before. "Chase, what the fuck is this?" "It was just a joke," he exploded, finally finding his voice. "Jesus Christ, it's not like I burned the place down. It's just a stupid faucet." That's when the beautiful irony of the moment hit me. Here was this guy who'd spent the entire day looking down on me for being a maintenance guy. And his idea of a joke was to create maintenance work. He'd deliberately broken something, knowing that I'd have to fix it, because in his mind that's all I was good for anyway. "Just a rental, right?" Jaleesa said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she echoed the excuse they'd all been using to justify their behavior. "I mean, what's the big deal if Chase trashes some rented boat?" I looked around the table, making eye contact with each person before I spoke. Camille was staring at me with wide eyes, finally starting to realize that something bigger was happening here. Marjorie looked confused but concerned. The other guests were trying to figure out how they'd suddenly found themselves in the middle of a family drama. "That's the thing," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a folded set of papers. "It's not a rental." I unfolded the document slowly, like I was performing some kind of magic trick. The boat registration, the insurance papers, the purchase agreement, all bearing my name in black and white. "This yacht is registered to me," I said, holding up the papers for everyone to see. "I bought it in cash. It's mine." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. Chase's mouth was hanging open like a fish gasping for air. Jaleesa's champagne flute was frozen halfway to her lips. Even the seagulls seemed to have stopped squawking. It was Camille who finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "You bought this." 2 months ago, I said. "I was planning to give it to your mother as a birthday gift. But honestly, after today, I think I'll keep it." And that's when all hell broke loose. The first person to react was Chase, and let me tell you, it wasn't pretty. His face went through about 17 different colors in the span of 5 seconds. Red, white, purple, then back to red again. He looked like a man who'd just realized he'd been caught stealing from his grandmother's purse. That's impossible," he stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "You can't afford. You fix things for a living." "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I fix things, including broken faucets that people vandalize for fun." Chase started sputtering something about how it was just a prank, how he didn't mean any real harm, how if he'd known it was my boat he never would have. But nobody was listening anymore. The cat was out of the bag, and it was a big, expensive, yacht-shaped cat that nobody could ignore. Jaleesa had gone completely silent, which might have been the first time in recorded history. She was staring at me like I'd just sprouted a second head, her champagne flute still frozen halfway to her lips. You could practically see the gears turning in her brain as she tried to process this new information and figure out how it changed everything she thought she knew about the world. I don't understand, Camille said, her voice small and confused. Where did you get the money? How did you? When did you? That's when the guilt started hitting them. Not all at once. More like waves crashing against a seawall, each one bigger than the last. I could see it in their faces as they started remembering all the little comments, all the jokes, all the times they'd made me feel like I was lucky to be invited to their fancy parties. Oh my God, whispered Sarah, Camille's cousin. All those times we talked about you like you weren't even there. Uncle Frank was shaking his head slowly, probably remembering every condescending comment he'd made about honest work and knowing your place. A few of the other guests were suddenly finding their plates very interesting, like they could somehow disappear if they stared at their salmon hard enough. But it was Marjorie who really got to me. The poor woman looked absolutely stricken, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her wine glass. Here was someone who'd always been decent to me, who'd never joined in on the jokes or the put-downs, and now she was realizing that she'd been part of a family that had been systematically disrespecting her son-in-law for years. Owen, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea. If I'd known, if any of us had known, would it have mattered? I asked, and I genuinely wanted to know the answer. Would you have treated me differently if you'd known I had money? Or were you just okay with treating me like crap because you thought I was poor? That hit home. Hard. You could see it in the way people shifted in their seats, the way they suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. Because the truth was, they had been okay with treating me like the help as long as they thought that's all I was. Jaleesa finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak than her usual imperious tone. But you dress like you drive that old truck. Because I like my truck, I said, and I like my work clothes. Just because I can afford expensive stuff doesn't mean I need to wear it like a costume to prove my worth. Chase was still spiraling, gesticulating wildly as he tried to explain himself to anyone who would listen. Look, if I'd known it was his boat, I never would have. I mean, I thought it was just some rental that the insurance company would cover anyway. It's not like I was trying to personally. Shut up, Chase. Jaleesa snapped, finally turning her attention to her boyfriend. Just shut the hell up. For the first time since I'd known her, Jaleesa looked genuinely rattled. The woman who always had a cutting comment ready, who could slice you down to size with nothing but a raised eyebrow, was completely at a loss for words. She kept looking back and forth between me and the registration papers like she was trying to solve some impossible puzzle. $2.5 million, she said finally, reading the purchase price off the documents. You paid $2.5 million for this boat. 2.6, actually, I corrected. Plus about another $100,000 in upgrades and equipment. The number hit the table like a bomb. $2.6 million. More money than most of these people saw in a year, maybe more than some of them would see in a lifetime. And I'd paid it in cash, like it was no big deal, while they'd all been treating me like some kind of charity case. But how? Camille asked, and for the first time I could hear something like respect in her voice. How did you save that much money? We've been married for 8 years, and I never. Because you never asked, I said simply. You never wondered where the money came from when I paid for your medical school. You never questioned how we could afford the house, or the cars, or any of the other stuff. You just assumed I was barely scraping by, because that fit the story you wanted to tell about me. That hit her hard. I could see her mentally reviewing our entire relationship, thinking about all the times she'd made assumptions about my finances, about my capabilities, about my worth as a person. All the times she'd laughed along when her family made jokes at my expense. I plan to give this boat to your mother today, I continued, looking directly at Marjorie. As a surprise birthday gift. I thought it would be nice for the family to have a place where we could all get together, make some good memories. Marjorie's eyes filled with tears. Oh, and I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, I told her. You've always been good to me. This isn't about you. But it was about everyone else. It was about years of condescension and disrespect, of being treated like I was lucky to be included in their world instead of recognizing that maybe, just maybe, they were lucky to be included in mine. Chase made one last desperate attempt to save face. Look, man, I'm really sorry about the faucet thing. If you'll just tell me how much it costs to fix, I'll write you a check right now. I looked at him for a long moment, this spoiled rich kid who thought money could solve every problem he created. You know what, Chase? I said finally. I think I'll pass on that offer. But now I'm doing it for me. The aftermath of my revelation was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Everything that had seemed solid and permanent just a few minutes ago was suddenly crumbling, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do to stop it. Chase was the first domino to fall, and boy, did he go down hard. After my comment about keeping the yacht for myself, something inside him just snapped. His face turned this ugly shade of purple, and he started pacing around the deck like a caged animal, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair and muttering to himself. "This is bullshit," he kept saying, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Complete and utter bullshit. You can't humiliate me like this in front of everyone." "I didn't humiliate you, Chase," I said, my voice still calm as a lake on a windless day. "You humiliated yourself when you decided to vandalize my property. I just provided the documentation." That sent him completely over the edge. He started ranting about how this was all some kind of setup, how I'd probably planned the whole thing just to make him look bad. He was gesticulating wildly, his voice getting higher and more hysterical with every word. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he screamed, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "You think you can just embarrass people and get away with it? Well, I've got news for you, buddy. I don't have to take this shit from some glorified janitor." And that's when he made his big dramatic exit. Stomped off toward the bow of the yacht like he was heading for the parking lot, except we were anchored in the middle of the harbor. It took him about 30 seconds to realize his mistake, at which point he spun around and marched back to where we were all sitting. "I want off this boat," he announced. "Right now? Take me back to shore immediately." "Sure thing," I said, reaching for my phone. "I'll call the harbor patrol. They can send a water taxi to pick you up. Should only take about 45 minutes. The look on his face when he realized he was trapped was priceless. Here was a guy who was used to storming out of restaurants and slamming car doors, and suddenly he was stuck on a boat with no way to make his grand exit. He stood there for a moment, opening and closing his mouth like a fish, before finally just collapsing into an empty chair and putting his head in his hands. While Chase was having his meltdown, Jaleesa was dealing with her own crisis. But instead of exploding outward like her boyfriend, she was imploding inward, and somehow that was even more devastating to watch. The woman who'd spent the entire day strutting around like she owned the world was suddenly very small and very quiet. She kept staring at me with these wide, shocked eyes, like she was seeing me for the first time and couldn't quite process what she was looking at. "I can't believe this," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I just can't believe this is happening." Then she turned on Camille with a fury that surprised everyone, including herself. "This is all your fault," she hissed. "You should have told us. How could you not know your own husband bought a yacht? What kind of wife doesn't know something like that?" I don't know," Camille stammered, looking completely lost. "I thought we told each other everything." "Well, obviously you don't," Jaleesa shot back. "God, Camille, you married beneath you and you didn't even know it wasn't true. Do you have any idea how stupid that makes our whole family look?" That's when Marjorie finally found her voice, and when she spoke, it was with an authority that reminded everyone why she'd been the family matriarch for 7 decades. "Enough," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute command. "Both of you, enough." Jaleesa started to protest, but Marjorie cut her off with a look that could have frozen hell. "I said enough, Jaleesa Marie. You've embarrassed yourself quite sufficiently for one evening." The silence that followed was deafening. Jaleesa's mouth snapped shut, and for the first time all day, she actually looked ashamed of herself. Then Marjorie turned to me, and I could see tears in her eyes. "Owen, I owe you an apology. A big one. I should have spoken up years ago when people were treating you disrespectfully in my presence. I should have put a stop to it." "Marjorie, you don't need to." "Yes, I do," she interrupted. "I misjudged you, Owen. Badly. I let my own prejudices cloud my judgment, and I'm deeply sorry for that." She paused, looking around the table at her family and friends, most of whom were suddenly finding their dessert plates very interesting. "You know what the worst part is?" she continued. "It wouldn't have mattered if you were actually just a handyman or a plumber or whatever. A person's worth isn't measured by their bank account or their job title. It's measured by their character, their kindness, their integrity. And by those standards, Owen, you've been showing us all up for years. The guilt was spreading around the table like wildfire now. People were starting to remember specific incidents, specific comments, specific moments when they'd made me feel like less than. And now they were all realizing that not only had they been wrong about my financial situation, but they'd been wrong about everything else too. I feel sick, Sarah whispered. Actually physically sick. Uncle Frank was nodding slowly, his face gray with shame. All those comments about honest work and knowing your place. Jesus, Owen, I'm so sorry. But I wasn't looking for apologies anymore. The time for apologies had passed a long time ago. The ride back to the marina was the quietest 2 hours of my life. After Chase's meltdown and Jaleesa's implosion, the party had pretty much died on the spot. People made awkward excuses about early morning meetings and babysitters, and within 30 minutes the yacht had cleared out like someone had called in a bomb threat. I'd spent the trip back focused on the controls, keeping my hands busy with the wheel and my eyes on the horizon. It was easier than looking at the handful of people still on board. Marjorie, who kept shooting me apologetic glances, Jaleesa, who'd gone completely silent after her mother's dressing down, and Camille, who sat in the stern staring out at the water like she was trying to solve the mysteries of the universe. We docked without incident, and I went through the motions of securing the yacht while everyone else gathered their things. Marjorie hugged me goodbye, whispering another apology that I told her she didn't need to make. Jaleesa slunk off without saying a word, probably to find Chase and lick their wounds together. But Camille lingered on the dock, shifting her purse from shoulder to shoulder and obviously working up the courage to say something. I finished my post-trip checklist, taking my time with each task because I wasn't particularly eager for whatever conversation was coming. Finally, she approached me as I was coiling the last dock line. Owen. Her voice was small, uncertain. Can we talk? I straightened up and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in hours. My wife of 8 years, the woman I'd supported through medical school, the person I'd thought I knew better than anyone in the world. She looked older somehow, like the events of the day had aged her in ways that went beyond simple exhaustion. Sure, I said. What's on your mind? She took a deep breath, like she was about to jump off a cliff. I'm sorry. About today, about Jaleesa, about everything. I should have defended you when she was making those comments. I should have shut it down instead of laughing along. It was a start, but apologies were cheap when they came after you got caught. You should have, I agreed. But that's not really the issue here, is it? She looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, this isn't about one bad day or a few inappropriate jokes. This is about 8 years of marriage where you never once asked me how I was really doing financially. 8 years where you just assumed I was struggling because that fit the narrative you wanted to believe. Her face crumpled a little. I thought I knew you. I thought we told each other everything. We do tell each other everything, I said. Or at least, you tell me everything. But when's the last time you asked me about my work? About my goals? About anything that wasn't directly related to your life or your family? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Because we both knew the answer. Here's a question for you. I continued. In all the times your family made jokes about me, in all the times they treated me like the help, did you ever defend me when I wasn't around? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. She looked down at her feet, then up at the mast of the yacht, anywhere but at my face. Did you? I pressed. More silence. And that silence told me everything I needed to know. You chose their comfort over my dignity, I said finally. For 8 years, you let them make me the punchline because it was easier than standing up to them. Can we fix this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought about the faucet, about the hours I'd spent repairing what Chase had deliberately broken. Like the faucet? I replied, maybe, but not tonight. The next morning, I drove to the marina before sunrise. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. For the first time in years, I was doing something purely for myself, and damn if it didn't feel good. The harbor was quiet at that hour, just the gentle sound of water lapping against hulls and the distant cry of early rising gulls. The Alabaster looked magnificent in the soft pre-dawn light, her white fiberglass gleaming like a pearl against the dark water. My yacht. My sanctuary. My proof that sometimes the quiet guy in the corner is the one you should never underestimate. I unlocked the cabin and made my way down to the galley, where that brass faucet gleamed like new. Fixed, functional, and perfect, just the way I'd left it after Chase's little tantrum. I filled the coffee maker with fresh water and started brewing a pot of the good stuff, the kind Jaleesa would probably call budget-conscious, without realizing it cost more per pound than her designer handbags. While the coffee brewed, I went through the morning routine of checking systems, reviewing weather reports, making sure everything was shipshape. It was peaceful work, the kind that clears your head and settles your soul. No drama, no condescension, no family members treating me like hired help. Just me, my boat, and the endless horizon. When the coffee was ready, I poured myself a mug and climbed up to the pilot house. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that no artist could ever quite capture. I settled into the captain's chair, one hand wrapped around my coffee mug, the other resting on the brass compass that pointed steady north. North. Always north. No matter what storms came or which way the wind blew, that needle knew exactly where it was supposed to point. There was something reassuring about that kind of certainty, that kind of unwavering purpose. My phone had been buzzing all morning with texts and missed calls. Camille, asking if we could talk. Marjorie, wondering if I was okay. Even a few from people who'd been at the party, probably wanting to apologize or explain or somehow make things right. I'd get to them eventually. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. But right now, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be. I didn't need their applause anymore. Didn't need their approval or their acceptance or their acknowledgement of my worth. I'd spent 15 years building something real while they'd been playing social games, and now I had the freedom to chart my own course. The harbor was starting to come alive around me. Other boat owners arriving for their morning routines, dock workers beginning their shifts, the first tourists of the day wandering along the waterfront. But I was separate from all of it, captain of my own destiny in a way that went far beyond just owning a boat. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to the sunrise, to new beginnings, to the man I'd become when nobody was watching. The compass pointed north, steady and true. And finally, so did I.